Welcome to week 3. And this week, we're going to talk about rebates and pricing strategies. For a supply chain manager, the main thing we worry about with rebates and pricing strategies is how the pricing strategies affect demand, which as a result impact how much we have to provide. Okay. We worry about not so much the quantity of demand, but how much it changes relative to what we forecast. There's an old saying that no forecast is perfect. Well, some pricing strategies, as you're going to see, can actually exacerbate the difference between actual demand and what is forecasted. So basically, we're just going to cover, I'm going to cover real quick some initial questions. I had some initial feedback from the week 2 that I was going to use, but for some reason the slides didn't save when I was at work, so I'm going to try to go from memory. So, and then we're going to talk about upsizing theory. I'm basically going to talk about several pricing strategies that are used. One's here like upsizing theory, a theory that was created by these. My research has shown that I guess the first came from the CEO of Pepsi Cola, who determined a great way to increase consumption. So one way we could increase the demand for a product is through increased consumption. Now, obviously, this strategy lends itself better to some than others. Obviously, we don't consume vehicles and durable goods, but this is good for like anything that is consumed, something that's a consumable short-term product life. Then we're going to talk about how Amazon smooths demand. We're going to be seeing a lot about Amazon in this class. This is one of the strategies that they use to smooth demand, especially when they don't have a product that you order. And you've probably all seen these strategies before. So it should be anything that's new. It's just this is something that Amazon consciously does to make sure that their demand matches what they have. I'm going to change this setting real quick. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. And then we're going to talk about rebating strategies. Rebates, every class I teach, always have, let's see, increasing consumption led to perceived obsolescence for many goods. To suppose it's, yeah, that's true. If you, trying to think how that would fit within this. Increasing consumption led to perceived obsolescence for many goods. I guess if you increase consumption so much that you bump into your next product cycle, maybe. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe Jeff's got something good about that, you know. Obsolescence is more of a time-based thing that is a demand-based thing. Although I guess, like for instance, in the defense industry, as we get closer to a certain age of our systems, we end up getting to a point where our suppliers stop creating products for our stuff. So what they'll do is they'll say, okay, you've got this system that you've designed to last for another 10 years. We're going to quit building this circuit board per se. So we're going to forecast 10 years worth of what we expect is the consumption that you're going to need for that system for 10 years. And in many cases, there's a systems theory that basically states that the more rare something is, the more it is consumed. It works in nature. It works in human nature also. The same thing happens here. So forecasting models pretty much take that into consideration with some of these computerized models. But for instance, so in this case, in a program that I recently worked on, we had forecasted 10 years worth of consumption at a normal rate. But then as we were using the system, the customer wanted to use the system more and more and more because, oh my goodness, this thing's going to be obsolete in 10 or 12 years. So we're going to get everything we can out of this thing. So in that case, I think you're correct. Increased consumption towards the end of a lifespan will actually create obsolescence. See, Jeff, obsolescence is in combination. Yes, you're absolutely right. That's where I was going. Um, very good, Jeff. You're absolutely right. What happens is when you forecast, there's a student I had in my last class that worked for Apple, and he said that Apple has an 18-month product lifespan. So they always plan to sell, have phones last 18 months on the shelves. But what happens is it's kind of like a seasonality curve where when you get to the point where it starts to become towards the end of its lifespan, if people who want that phone will be more apt to buy it because it's almost obsolete, unless they want to wait for the new phone. But so in your model, Amy, you're right. Consumption would create a would race us towards an obsolescence curve based upon product life cycle, and as Jeff succinctly said, exactly. With when you see Apple with the iPhone, that's a very good example. Yeah, and Jeff said here, being in the tech industry, Apple does not provide roadmaps to their clients. Working for HP and Dell, it is critical to provide roadmaps. And you're absolutely right. And one thing, we're going to cover Dell's push-pull hybrid supply strategy. And the thing about when you go from a decentralized to a centralized strategy, companies love centralized strategies because you can reduce costs. But unfortunately, you reduce the flexibility of your supply system to react to demand. But when you create roadmaps, what you do, I mentioned this in last week's discussion, Ashby's first law of systems. Only more variety can absorb more variety. So what you do is you do the any color but black strategy. You say, okay, here's a roadmap to where our products are going to go. We're going to restrict you to these products. And that's a very good way of placing controls on your supply chain environment. Does that make sense? But yeah, those are very good points, Jeff. Thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to briefly cover upsizing strategy. And you've seen this before. You walk into McDonald's, like in this example, if you walk in, let's say that your Happy Meal is $4, and if you want to add an extra 50 cents, you get a large fries and large drinks. Oh no, sorry. Okay, sorry. Amy just mentioned. Sorry to throw traps of Jenna off your agenda. I come from the world of environmental and social sustainability, so I have a hard time early with demand in terms of pricing strategies to sell more. Yes, we can go into a philosophical debate, and actually, this week, every time I teach this class, the rebate section, it's like, is rebates are rebates moral? And you have the moral supply chainers on one side, and you have the business-minded supply chainers on the other side. And I can see both sides. And you're right. You can say, yeah, you're increasing consumption, which has a long-term detrimental effect. But when you're dealing with companies that are worried about the next quarter or the next product cycle, I could see their point too. It's all on what side of the coin you're on. But every class that I have taught, that always comes up. There's always this moral thing about, are rebates moral? So upsizing is a great way to increase consumption of a good. So we've always seen this, if you add an extra 50 cents, you get extra food. If you add it to $1, you get a whole bunch more food. And when you look at the volume of the food, it always makes sense. So sometimes people ask, well, how can they get away with it? Well, it's very simple. I had an uncle who worked for PepsiCo a long time ago, and as a matter of fact, it was PepsiCo that invented this strategy. And he said that when you look at the cost of a drink, he said that the fixed costs are absorbed in the first 3 or 4 cents of a drink. So now this is a few years back. So he said, if a drink costs $1, the cup that holds the drink may cost 3 or 4 cents, and the sugar and the water may cost another 1 cent. So he said, soft drinks are a very big profit maker. So if you double the size of the drink but only charge extra 10 cents, all that 10 cents goes straight to profit. Same with French fries, same with a hamburger. The thing to remember with an upsizing strategy is all the fixed costs of the meal are absorbed in the initial order. So a fast food chain, it's real simple. Yeah, I'll give you an extra 3 or 4 cents worth of food and I'll charge you $1 more. So it makes perfect sense. Um, and as you're right, Amy, that does encourage people to consume more. But as far as if you, as a supply chain, want to encourage consumption and you have a non-durable good that is a consumable, this is a good strategy. Makes sense. You have to worry about things like substitutability. As a matter of fact, in my notes that I was going to use, when we talked about Meditech and the expanded product lines, and we also talked, one of the parts that we talked about was seasonality and pricing changes. When we look at pricing changes, we look at a thing called elasticity, and Jeff's probably dealt with this, so please forgive me. Elasticity deals with the rate of change of demand based upon the increase of a price. So let's say that we move our price up 5%. A high demand elasticity would say that if I move my price up 5%, my demand will go down, say, 50% or 40%. It's a really big number, okay? If we have a low elasticity, if the price goes up 5%, the demand elasticity, your demand may go up 5%, 4%, 3%, 6%, whatever. It's much smaller. So high elasticity, you have a larger jump in demand compared to the price, and vice versa. Well, if you have low elasticity, these strategies are very useful because it's easy to figure out the price points, especially if you have very low variation in your pricing. If you have high elasticity, it's a very dangerous strategy because a lot of times when you deal with elasticity, it isn't a linear number. There's a point in which you get this point of no return where the elasticity just goes off the charts. You know, like for instance, if you're gonna buy, let's say, if you're gonna buy a phone and the phone's normally $300, if you go up to $350, the demand may go down maybe 5-10%. But let's say if you double the cost, no one will buy it. You know, so it's not a linear trade-off in your elasticity. So this is something that needs to be understood when you start doing these strategies. Now, seasonality is the same thing. There's a thing called substitutability. Basically, when you're looking at a pricing strategy for your goods, you need to see how easy is my product to be substituted by something else. If I'm the only person on the block, I have lower demand elasticity because they have nowhere else to go. But when more people come in, or if there's more substitutes, like if you're selling cars and someone comes in with a bicycle and can compete, oh, okay, not getting into an economic conversation. I think what you're talking about now is demand and quantity demanded, different things which impact. Yes, you are correct. Yeah, I'm just trying to give enough heads up as to how these things affect supply chains. And you're right, Jeff. I'm not gonna go too far in the woods, but when you deal with supply chains, it's very important to understand how your demand is influenced, because as you'll see, this isn't in the textbook, and it's probably for good reason. You probably never use this unless you're going to actually be doing supply chain. But as a manager, it's very good to understand what kind of demand that you're looking at. When we look at rebating in a minute, you're going to look at how we can actually accidentally shift your demand to give you artificial demand. So thank you, Jeff. So basically, as I mentioned, this is something that I got off of, I think I got this off a website a while back. And if you look at the amount of profit that a company can make, as I said, fixed costs are absorbed in the initial purchase of your meal. So it's really simple to create these price points, because all I got to know is, okay, how much are the variable costs, and how much do I need to charge to make back the variable costs. This is something that's very popular in theory of constraints. That's a very popular tactic. Is you basically, once you absorb the fixed costs of operations, you basically provide special incentives for new people, because now all you have to worry about is your new clients or your favorite customers just cover the variable costs. So this is just a quick just a quick graphic to show you the fixed and variable cost analysis, basically showing you that once you cover the fixed costs, an upsizing strategy is very profitable. So now Amazon demand smoothing. As you've probably realized, Amazon doesn't have much control over their demand sometimes. And this is because, like, for instance, when you order something, one of the luxuries of online ordering is if you're not in a hurry to have something, you can say, yeah, go on Amazon and decide that you want to wait a while for your product. But what if you want your product right now? Amazon has a great way of demand smoothing. I have a little chart that I'm going to show you in a minute. Oh, there we go. What I got? I'm going to go to Amy real quick. But I got out of the initiative in Module 3 reading. Seems we implement more marketing strategies, leverages for forecasting and controlling demand. Sort of an yes, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing. I try not to go too far into the woods. Basically, what Amy's saying here is it seems like Chapter 3 is more of a marketing chapter than it is more of a supply chain. And that is true. But this is important to know as a supply chain manager because, and Jeff, please feel free to correct me, but in pretty much every organization I've worked with and worked for, this is all siloed. Marketing makes their decisions irrelevant of what the supply chains do. So all of a sudden, the supply chain manager may say, hey, we're going to have a big rebate. Make sure you have enough product there. And you're like, well, no one told me about this. So it's just good for supply chain managers to understand how different marketing strategies affect the supply chain. So, and I'd say, looking at Jeff's background, he's probably got a lot more experience in this than I do. So I would really love to see what kind of information he has on this. Yeah, like Jeff confirmed what I said. I'm just repeating the stuff just so I can have it in the recording. But yeah, I've always seen how marketing, and see, marketing is funny because they are incentivized to sell as much product as possible. They don't. There's an old thing I remember reading it when I was doing my MBA a while back. It was the Campbell's Soup dilemma, and what happened is the Campbell's Soup marketers. This was like in the 80s, I think, or the 70s. They had a bunch of cream of chicken soup or a bunch of soup that they wanted to get off the shelves. So the marketers decided to just drop the price on it really quick. So what happened is people bought a whole bunch of soup. And the supply chain, like, oh my God, we got a bunch of soup orders. Let's go build a whole bunch of soup. But the next quarter rolled around and they increased all soup sales. Exactly, not just for Campbell's. But what happened is in the next quarter, no one was buying soup. And they did this for like 2 or 3 quarters. And all of a sudden they had a whole bunch of soup on the shelves. Marketing would come in, drop the price. They'd sell all their soup. And then supply chain would kick it up and make a whole bunch of soup. And then the next quarter, they couldn't sell soup. And they almost went bankrupt doing this until all of a sudden some very smart marketing researchers realized that consumers were saying, hey, I'm going to buy enough soup to last me for the quarter because soup is a pretty durable good. I could put soup on the shelf for a long time, and I'll just wait until the next sale. So Campbell's was basically starving their own demand by basically undercutting their own customers' demand, and at the same time creating artificial demand. I'm going to briefly go over this in a minute. So going back to Amazon's demand smoothing strategy, what they do is they say, okay, let's say that you order something that's very popular, and they may not have a whole bunch of these on the shelf. So what they'll do is they'll say, hey, how about product B for a lower price? And they have all these algorithms where they can say that based upon your sales history or your purchasing patterns, they will match up your preferences as their model shows to other products. This is very similar to dynamic pricing. So they'll take a product that they have a high inventory on. They'll give you a really good low price on it to encourage you to move to a high inventory item. Now, if you still want the low inventory item, they'll say, fine, you can have the low inventory item, but we're going to charge you a higher price. And they do this with the expectation that a portion of the demand that they do that on will go to the high inventory item. And in many cases, high inventory items have a pretty good profitability. So, and they really do this real time. From what I understand, it's pretty much real time. When you log in, they pretty much know how many people are going to want this low inventory item, like the new iPhone, and they know what everyone's sensitivities are as far as their demand is. So they try to shift the demand to items with higher inventory. And if you want to have the low inventory item, they're going to charge you a higher price. It's like a premium price dynamic. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm gonna. So yeah. So discounted shipping strategy. They do the same thing with shipping times. They'll say, when do you want this item? If you want it right now, they say, fine, you can have it right now, but you're going to pay a premium for it. What this does is this allows them to save their shipping availability for the more high profit shipping cost alternatives. So what they'll do is they will encourage people to buy the product later on, to buy the product but accept the product later on. This allows them to also, if you take let's say the 2 to 4 week option instead of the 2 to 4 day option, this also allows them to delay sending it out to you, because they can say, okay, we're going to get this product in a week and then send it out a day or two later, and they can still sell that high inventory item for you. So yeah, and Amazon manages their shipping. One thing that I've noticed working at an APO, they actually are embedded with the U.S. Postal Service's system. Because I was talking with the postmaster here, and he said that when they scan the package with their gun, Amazon immediately knows that the postmaster has the box in their cage. And I thought that was a pretty impressive system, how Amazon has actually come in and actually embedded themselves into the U.S. Postal Service system, or might be vice versa. I guess Amazon's probably bigger than the Postal Service. So in a minute, I'm going to show you a demand smoothing curve. So the objective to this strategy is to do one of two things. As I said, you're going to delay the shipping as far as possible to satisfy the customer's demand, so that you could use cheaper shipping alternatives, but also allows you to delay the shipment of the product, so that you can also be able to, let's say if you have an unexpected large demand, you can actually increase the lead time intentionally in order to delay getting more product in. And as I said, Amazon's got this automated system. Seems to work very well for them. Is there any questions on this? Okay. So here's some recommendations that I found in one of my books I have here on how to use demand smoothing to avoid creating artificial fluctuations in your demand. So they say here, avoid using end of quarter sales promotions or rebates. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. What rebates do is it artificially inflates your demand by shifting your demand so that people who would have bought it later will buy it sooner. And what that does is it creates an artificial demand oscillation. We're going to talk about this in the week when we cover, my mind just went blank, the beer game, oh shoot. Well, that's what I get for being at work late tonight. It's the effect we have oscillations caused by lead time. But we're going to cover that in on week 8 or week 7. So use small batches and level production as much as possible. The art of using small batches is that you're able to control the amount that you push out of your supply chain, so you avoid making too much product. If you can get away with sending 4 small batches instead of 1 large batches, even though your truck sizes may be smaller, that's usually a better strategy, because although you may pay a little bit more for shipping, you can, if this is done correctly, pay less in inventory. And then a lot of companies do this. Well, not a lot of large companies, but there are companies that use small batch sizes to compete with the larger batch size companies. But you need to have a really flexible supply chain to do this. Most large supply chains have centralized warehouses, which kind of lends itself to the large batch strategy. So improve the ability of the delivery system to respond to demand, to make sure that they can get stuff out. Reliability. It's something with this has to deal with customer service levels, being able to meet customer demand when the customer needs a product. Maximize external variety with minimal internal variety using the RAP. This is principles of postponement. I covered that last week. Basically, what you do is you push the variation as far into the supply chain as possible by modularizing and using common parts, so that you can absorb some of the variability in the back end of the supply chain. Please feel free to look at the video conference notes I had on that last week if you have any questions. If you do, feel free to send me either an email or something in the class, so I'll be more than happy to clarify. And maintain finished goods inventory as low as possible. This kind of lends itself to the RAP principle. And these are and the other ones: place inventory and supply chains based on customer lead time expectations if possible. This is part of the supply safety stocks. We're going to cover that later in the class. And exploit lower costs once your fixed costs have been met. And that's what I dealt with the upsizing strategy. If you get your fixed costs covered early in your supply cycle, you will have lower costs than your competitors, because now you don't have to worry about covering the fixed costs. So now, when we talk about demand leveling, I'm bringing this up because of what rebates does. When we deal with demand leveling, we basically have 3 types of customers. You have customers that want the product right now; they're the at-once customers. You have customers that are pretty much at lead time customers. So if your lead time is, say, 2 or 3 days, the customer wants it within 2 or 3 days. And then you have ones that whenever you get it to me, whenever, is fine. They're called the beyond lead time customers. Ideally, you want most of your demand to the right side of this curve. Okay, and there's 2 ways to do this. Okay, obviously, if you have a bunch of beyond lead time customers are much easier to meet. The customer service level is much easier to fulfill when your demand is when most of your customers are in the beyond lead time category. So there are 2 ways to do this. Either A, you encourage the customers to delay the receipt of the product through enticements, like we said before. Or you can improve your lead time. obviously with this chart here, if you decrease your lead time, those two bars that represent the lead time window will shift to the left. So you will automatically move your customers into the beyond lead time area. Obviously, that's the best way to go. Is it the easiest thing to do? Maybe not. It just depends. Some companies just can't do it. So what they'll do is they'll use demand leveling strategies, which is kind of like with your dynamic pricing. They'll set their pricing such that they will encourage people to be willing to wait longer for their products. So the idea is to shift your demand to the right as much as possible. Now, the problem with rebates is twofold. The first thing, rebates, as I mentioned before, creates this demand shift to the left. Because what happens, let's say you decide that you want to have a rebate on some excess stock. What happens is customers that would have waited to buy a product now get enticed to get their product now because the sale encourages the demand. So although like in this chart here, a right demand shift is a good thing, a rebate actually goes the opposite direction, such that now you're pushing all of your demand to the left. And that what that does is it creates an artificial demand in your system such that you suddenly will see this spike. And although there may be a small percentage that may have been people who were looking at other products, a very popular product, obviously, there will be a percentage of those that were people that were pretty much included in your forecast demand. You just encourage them to get your product earlier. Okay, so that's the first thing that it does. The second thing it does is it displaces the demand for similar products. If you remember the product lines example in the Meditech case study, where they had all these product lines. In theory, and I've heard this quite frequently, you always hear that you want to increase product lines so that you get exposed to more customers. And all that is true, and that can be true. What also happens is when you create a new product line, some people will actually change their consumption pattern based upon your product mix. A good example is what happened to Mercedes-Benz in Europe. Mercedes-Benz they decided one year that they were going to compete in the low and medium car market. So they introduced this low and medium car. And when they introduced it in Europe, it had very good sales. But what they realized was that the sale of their high-end cars, the cars that have a better profit margin, fell. And what they found out was that people who were buying these high-priced Mercedes suddenly said, oh, wow, I can get a cheaper Mercedes. I'm going to buy this cheap one instead. So Mercedes quickly realized that they were actually starving their own demand for their high-end products, and I think they eventually stopped it. I haven't followed it since this happened, but it was very interesting in the fact that they quickly realized that their new product line was actually damaging other product lines. Toyota did something similar, but on the opposite end. Toyota for a long time was on the low and middle end range, and they introduced a Lexus. So Toyota, in this example, they did have people who moved from the Toyota to the Lexus, but they didn't mind because the Lexus had a higher profit margin. And they also took people from other luxury segments to buy their cars. So when you look at adding product lines, you need to understand both the the target market and also how your customers will react to your new product line. Any questions? Auto cannibalization. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. I used to be a car guy. But yeah, Jeff just mentioned that auto cannibalization where, yeah, Ford, the American auto dealers did this for a while too, where they were introducing product lines. And I remember at one time, we look at GM and Pontiac and all those, they had like something like over 100 different product lines, and they were all competing against each other, and they were cutting each other's prices, and they were basically shifting the demand between people in the same company, and basically driving themselves slowly out of business. So it's interesting, but it's once again, and as Jeff mentioned earlier, it leads to the silo effect, where in many cases, my experience shows, you have managers of different product lines, and their job is to sell their product line, and they don't talk to the other product lines. We don't think about that kind of stuff. So yeah, exactly. General Motors, Oldsmobile, Pontiac are gone now. I was kind of an old Pontiac fan, so I was kind of sad to see them go. But but that's a point when you could say that decreasing product lines is a good idea. So the last thing I'm going to cover just real quick. I added this for my last class because there's some confusion over what a hub and spoke system is. And the hub and spoke system was created during the heydays of the airlines and was adapted to supply chain later on. And this slide that they spelled San Francisco wrong, I really need to fix that. But nonetheless, the hub and spoke system basically uses a theory in which you centralize your distribution in one location as a hub, and then you run your distribution out to spokes in a certain market. This also lends itself to some network theory, such that networks different from systems, such that networks don't have any essential part that the system cannot do without. Like, for instance, in this example, if, say, Los Angeles was to go out tomorrow, you could still get stuff to Phoenix. Although this is not a true system because, like, Albuquerque's isolated, but you could actually operate, like, from Los Angeles to Albuquerque. But what you do is you create your hubs in areas where you can maximize transportation costs in a region. Yeah, I love looking at hub and spoke maps for airlines. Yeah, but if you look at how the hub and spoke system got the airlines in trouble, there's a weakness. Once again, it goes to flexibility versus cost. The hub and spoke is very good at reducing costs because you basically have one hub and a bunch of spokes. Okay, you have to worry about the transportation costs or everything else. That works out great, but the downside is flexibility. Southwest took on the hub and spoke system by saying, okay, fine. We're not going to do hub and spoke. Instead, we're going to decentralize our system by flying into smaller airports near the hubs. And that really caused problems for these giant hub and spoke airlines who got very big because they were designed for hub and spoke. In week 2, we looked at a scenario in which they were trying to go from, or I'm sorry, it was week 1. I'm sorry, or was it week 1 or week 2? Where they were trying to go from a decentralized to a centralized design, and we were asking. Oh, it was week 2. Sorry. So they're asking for how would you design this? Actually, in a week or 2, you're going to be actually doing this. There's some math involved and some formulas and equations. But A centralized system is good at dropping costs, but it's not good at flexibility, such that if one of your hubs goes out, your ability to service those areas in that hub is decreased because it's centralized. Decentralized has higher costs, but the ability to absorb variation from unforeseen problems in a hub and spoke are kind of mitigated. Each strategy has its own strengths and weaknesses. Some strategies are good with the centralized, some are good with decentralized. Like if I was in Japan, and I think I posted the just-in-time thing. Japan's got a very small area, and the distance between points is very small. So a decentralized system works great in Japan. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the way the Japanese companies operate, they have a lot of distributors in a lot of different regions. They don't mind doing that because everything's fairly close. Now, in America, where warehouse space is fairly cheap because of all the space, and you can drive 3,000 miles from coast to coast and still be in the same country, the decentralized approach may not be the same. So just some food for thought.